But let's move into saturated fat and explain what's going on there so people are properly equipped for themselves and if they have to have a conversation with their doctor.
Yep. So the same type of research that I was talking about with the red meat and diabetes, the observational, epidemiological, prospective cohort studies, that's exactly the same kind of studies that were done that proved that eating saturated fat, eating animal fat, eating red meat would increase your risk of heart attack, would increase your risk of stroke, would increase your risk of death. That's the same kind of research. And again, as I said earlier, human beings have been eating lots of fatty red meat since we have been a species on this planet. The entire 300,000 years. There isn't, and only after the agricultural de-evolution, I don't call it a revolution, it was a de-evolution because it actually harmed our health. Although it gave us as a species the ability to procreate more and for our population to explode and for things like governments and taxes and tax collectors and slavery and bondage. Those things were invented after we started the agricultural de-evolution. But human health actually got worse and continues to get worse to this very day. So that's the same kind of research. So again, as I said earlier, if you come at me with an extraordinary claim, red meat causes heart disease, saturated fat causes heart disease, that's an extraordinary claim. You're saying that something that humans have eaten for our entire existence on this planet has been bad for us this entire time. That's the claim. Saturated fat, animal fat. You better have some damn fine evidence, randomized controlled trials, maybe a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials to prove that to me. Otherwise, I'm going to ignore you. And so when I first started doing this 5 or 6 years ago, Jesse, I just believed when Harvard School of Public Health published something, I'd be like, okay, got it. I would just take it in and move on. I would only read the abstract. I didn't read the whole study. I'd forgotten my statistics training and my epidemiological training that we got in my undergraduate classes and also in the first year of medical school. We had a 1 hour a week class that kind of helped us understand statistics, but it wasn't nearly as much as it should have been. I would just take that at face value and be like, okay, Harvard wouldn't say it if it weren't true. And most people, I think, do that as well. They're like, well, I mean, if Harvard published a study and then the Wall Street Journal has an article about it, that sounds pretty reliable to me. Who am I? I'm a truck driver. I'm a hairdresser. I'm a waitress. I'm a factory worker, whatever. I don't know anything about this stuff. But this guy from YouTube and this guy, from podcast fame, they're telling me, no, you can't trust that anymore. And I think that you're right not to trust that anymore, to take all that with a huge grain of salt and do your own research about this stuff, because there are very, very excellent sources of information on YouTube and other social media that show clearly that this is not true. And Jesse, you know this, in the show notes of every one of my YouTube videos, including the one I just posted about type 2 diabetes being caused by red meat, down in the show notes are links to every bit of the research that I talk about, every bit of all the press releases, everything. I link everything because I want people to look it up for themselves, because you don't really have to be an epidemiologist or a dietitian or a doctor or a PhD. You don't have to be that to kind of sort this stuff out. When you realize that the bedrock assumption is that whatever food we were eating for the last 300,000 years, for 99% of our time on this planet, that's probably the best food for us to eat, because evolution is in fact the ultimate scientific experiment. If you're eating something is not helping you reproduce and evolve and grow and live, you will become extinct. And we see this multiple times in biology. This has happened multiple thousands, if not millions of times since life has been on this planet. If you get off into some eddy you get off into an evolutionary dead end, your species becomes extinct. But yet humans eating lots of fatty red meat are literally now the apex species on the planet.
Are you ever left wondering whether these dietary and lifestyle changes you're making are actually having an impact on your health? This is where Insight Tracker comes in. You get a personalized picture of what's happening inside your body and a custom action plan to help you reach your health goals. There's 5 steps to the process. First one being choosing your health plan. Second, you get your blood work done, and they make this really easy. They can come right out to the house. Step 3 is to get your analysis. Step 4 is to implement your custom action plan. And then step 5 is to retest and recalibrate. And that last step you can do periodically over time to continue to monitor what's happening inside your body and continue to tweak your diet and lifestyle. As a viewer of the show, you get 20% off Insight Tracker by following the link in the description and using the code Jesse20 at checkout. Sign up for Insight Tracker today to get a personalized picture of what's happening inside your body and a custom action plan to help you reach your health goals. Let's come back to the saturated fat story. I think it'd be helpful to go through the conventional story of how that leads to heart disease. And then we'll talk about the holes in that story. And then we'll correct it and talk about how too many carbs are actually what's causing that.
Yeah. So the main argument that the average primary care doctor uses on patients when it comes to eating saturated fat causes heart disease is they will literally say something like eating all that saturated fat clogs up your arteries. And they'll even have a model on their countertop in the exam room showing this clogged up artery. See, this is cholesterol right here in the wall of the artery. If you eat foods high in cholesterol and high in saturated fat, you're clogging up. And using that word clog immediately brings up the analogy of your kitchen drain. And all people know that if you pour grease into your kitchen sink, when it cools down, it solidifies and it'll stop up your sink. We all know that. But people don't think through that simple analogy. First of all, we're not room temperature. We're 98.7 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Fat never solidifies in our body. First of all, if you just want to use that simple romper room illustration or analogy, that doesn't happen in our body. We're very warm-blooded. So, and then secondly, if you start to press the average primary care doctor on that, like, wait a minute, our body is not the same temperature, room temperature as a sink. That's not going to work. Plus, it should clog up our esophagus and our stomach and our intestines, not our arteries. Somehow it got into the circulation. How did it do that if it clogged up? It should clog up my esophagus. I should starve to death. That's what saturated fat would do, if that's really true. Well, at that point, you've reached the end of your primary care doctor's understanding about the biochemistry of this and the physiology of this. At that point, they'll start to get emotionally upset with you. And that's a huge red flag that your doctor doesn't understand the science. Anytime a professional starts to get upset with you emotionally, that's a bad sign. That means they don't understand what they're talking about. They just basically threw you a line of crap and expected you to swallow it. And now that you're pushing back a little bit, you've reached the limit of their knowledge. And so that's why on my videos, I don't go in as much depth as other people do, because I'm just trying to get people to understand the basics of this. Because I'm talking to the patient. And then I'll let the patient talk to the doctor, because in many cases they've changed their doctor's mind and their doctor's now recommending a proper human diet. So that's what I enjoy doing, is talking to patients and be like, look, that doesn't make any sense. Do this for 90 days and then recheck your labs. And so what the doctor would say is, if you eat saturated fat, that's going to raise your total cholesterol. That's going to raise your LDL cholesterol. And now that total cholesterol is just about being completely shot in the head as a risk factor for heart disease, now they only want to talk about LDL cholesterol. Well, as more studies are coming to light that were buried, we're starting to see that LDL cholesterol is probably a pretty poor marker for heart disease, right? Now they're starting to talk about things like ApoB and like LP(a) and small dense particles. And it's like, okay, yeah, you keep finding a new test to talk about, and then we keep shooting that test in the head. Like, you remember TMAO. That was huge for a minute. Oh, if you eat red meat, your TMAO will be high. That's going to cause heart disease. We know it. We've done the genomic studies. We just know it's a fact. You don't ever hear about TMAO anymore, do you? Because it fizzled out. It literally wasn't a predictor of anything. And so the same thing I predict is going to happen. It's already happened to total cholesterol. And now it's going to happen to LDL cholesterol. Then it's going to happen to LP(a). Then it's going to happen to ApoB. These things are not markers. They're not. They may be proxy markers of something going on in your metabolism, but they are not causative substances, causative molecules for heart disease. And I think is in the next few years, you'll start to see that very clearly, that none of the vegan cardiologists are talking about ApoB anymore. They're not talking about LP little a. They'll be off talking about some new tests that they've discovered that proves that eating a plant-based diet is the best, healthiest diet for your heart. And then we'll debunk that test. And then you're going to see this moving goalposts as the carnivore and keto community continue to grow almost exponentially, because you've got such a large database now of people who've been eating literally saturated fat every day of their life, eating red meat every single day of their life for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 25 years. And you can check a CAC score, a coronary artery calcium score on them, and it's 0. You can check, and yeah, man, their total cholesterol and their LDL cholesterol is sky high, but their coronary arteries are clean as a whistle because their A1C is normal, their fasting insulin is normal, their triglycerides are normal, and their HDL cholesterol are all 4 normal. And their markers of inflammation, their CRP, sed rate, ferritin, homocysteine, and others, they're all normal. Their arteries are squeaky clean. And so then, because they're saying if you just think about this, Jesse, they're saying if you just 2 servings of red meat a week increase your risk of diabetes. That's the current study. The previous study was just 2 servings a week increase your risk of heart disease. Well, what do you do with somebody like Sean Baker, who's eating 3 pounds of red meat a day with the fat that comes with it? And he's been doing that for a decade, and his coronary arteries are clean as a whistle. How do you square that? Because if red meat is so dangerous that just 2 servings a week increase your risk, then somebody's eating 3 pounds of red meat a day, like Sean is, or like I am, our arteries ought to be riddled within just a year or 2 or 3, just completely destroyed by this fatty red meat diet. But yet we don't see that. And so at some point, I would expect the Harvard School of Public Health guys to say, let's compare. Let's take a cohort of 100 vegans and 100 carnivores, and let's follow them for 5 years. And let's follow their A1Cs and fasting insulins, and let's do CT angiograms on their heart, and let's do CIMTs, and let's just check everything on these 2 cohorts as they go forward into the future. Man, I would love it if they did that study, but I predict they won't. But even though it'd be a very easy study to set up and do, because vegans are very proud of their diet and they love their diet and they'll stick to it when nobody's watching, usually. Carnivores are very proud of their diet. They proclaim it from the rooftops on social media. They love their diet. They're going to stick to that carnivore diet almost without exception. And so you would know that you would have very high retention in both of these groups, and you could follow their metabolic markers through the years. And that would put this to rest forever. And so then the majority of people out there who are omnivores, that's what most people are. They eat some plants, eat some meat, whatever. They just eat whatever. Then you're saying, okay, we've got the 2 extremes here, the vegans and the carnivores. How do they do metabolically as time goes on? Because also you eliminate healthy user bias, don't you? Because both groups, they want their diet to be the best one. So neither group's going to be smoking. They're not going to be drinking much alcohol. They're going to be out there doing wind sprints or lifting weights or doing something. And so you eliminate all the biases that can slip into the research results by doing a study like that. And that's why I predict Harvard won't do that study.
All right, so you've made it clear saturated fat, red meat, they're not the culprits when it comes to heart disease. But let's talk about, we know a lot of people are affected by that, and it's a real issue in society these days. So let's talk about the truth of what's happening there.
Probably the vast majority of heart disease is caused from eating or breathing in things that damage the glycocalyx on the inside of arteries and the vasa vasorum, which is the tiny little vasculature that wraps around most arteries and goes through the arterial wall to actually feed the inner membranes of the artery. When something is inflammatory, it causes inflammation. And there's actually studies that show that the glycocalyx, which is this tiny little cilia inside of the artery wall, inside of the artery, in the lumen, that they do thousands of things. They do the glycocalyx does things that we have not even discovered yet. That's my prediction. We'll see how that prediction goes in 10 years. But when you eat a highly inflammatory, high carb, sugar filled meal, or drink a Coca-Cola, or drink a fruit juice smoothie, we can actually see the glycocalyx just become inactive. It either sheds off or just becomes completely paralyzed after that high carb inflammatory meal. That's a big deal, but the average lipidologist, they don't want to talk about that at all. They just want to talk about the saturated fat. So the vast majority of the damage is done by causing inflammation and damage to the tiny arterioles and the capillaries that feed every single cell in our body. And that damage is caused by a high carbohydrate inflammatory diet. So you wind up with high blood sugar, high insulin, and high levels of inflammation. Those are the three horsemen of heart disease, also of brain disease, also of kidney disease, liver disease, any disease you can think of that's chronic and progressive. It's being caused by hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, and chronic inappropriate levels of inflammation. That's what's causing all of it. And that's why when you remove the high carb foods and remove the inflammatory foods, everything goes back to normal, because it's vital that everybody understand this. The default setting on your body, and I'm talking to you, all you guys, the default setting is good health. Okay, if it weren't, you would have died in childbirth, or you would have died in utero, or you would have died in childhood. You are set. That's your default setting, only to the degree with which you slowly poison yourself, either by ingesting pollution in the form of high carb inflammatory foods, or breathing pollution, or drinking pollution in the form of alcohol, will your health suffer. And that's why when somebody goes real whole food, meat heavy keto, or ketovore, or carnivore, they feel like it's almost miraculous. But it's not a miracle. It's physiology. You've basically removed all the things that are causing hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, and chronic inappropriate inflammation. You've removed those things out of your diet. And most people try to breathe clean air. Most people try to drink clean water. Most people try not to smoke. And so once you've removed all the pollution, whether edible or not, your body starts to heal. And it's not a miracle. It's just that your body's default setting is to be healthy. And so it starts to heal all the damage as best it can. And you go back to this level of health that for many people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and beyond, they never dreamed they would have that level of health again. And that's why it feels miraculous. But it's not. It's just it's the physiology doing its job of trying to keep you healthy. And only when you batter it down so much with just too much food, too much pollution, too much alcohol, does it just give up and say, okay, I'm permanently damaged. I can never recover that degree of health again.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Any disease you can think of that's chronic and progressive, it's being caused by hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, and chronic inappropriate levels of inflammation. Your default setting is good health. And if you're not enjoying good health,